Hello everyone, welcome back to the podcast. I'm Adrian Lloyd, this is Just My Stupid Opinion. Today is the 17th of November 2017, and I thought I'd start off today on an update about the college strikes that's been going on. Today was the end of week 5 of the College Ontario strike, with still very little resolved. On Thursday, the 16th of November, the teachers and the rest of the faculty were given a forced vote whether to go back to work, which the majority of them voted for no, and they decided to continue the strike. Because of this, later on in the evening, Kathleen Wynne announced that she was going to be signing some back-to-work legislation in order to force the teachers to go back, because she's saying by now it's the students, such as myself and many others, who are suffering. The strike has significantly affected the students in many different ways, but some students have dropped out of their program altogether because they figure there's going to be a lot of work to catch up on, little bit of time. In order to make up for the loss of classes, there's been talks of extending the school year, taking away the majority of the Christmas break, and completely doing away with the reading week that comes in February, I believe, maybe March of 2018 for the colleges. In my college, the Algonquin College here in Ottawa, we don't get a reading week in the first semester. I don't know if this is the same for the rest of the colleges. I know that the universities for sure get a reading week in the first semester, but we don't, and now they're talking about taking that away from the students. For somebody such as myself who lives in the city, and I actually live in pretty close proximity to the school, close enough that I could walk if I wanted to, it doesn't affect me as much, but this definitely has put a lot of strain on students who live either outside of the city or any other part of the country or even the world, because we have international students at Algonquin. We even have international students in my class. Some of them have gone home. Actually, I would say most of them have gone home during this time because they don't know when the next time they're going to be able to see their family. If people live, in Toronto, Montreal, or even on the other side of the country, come Christmas break, which it sounds like by now is just going to be a few days, they're not going to be able to go home to their families now. So this has impacted students in that way. We've fallen behind on our work. 5 weeks, almost 6 weeks of strike, that's an entire unit. In one of my classes, we were learning electricity. I think we had one more week that we had to do before the strike ended, which that might be scrapped that final week now. But then we were supposed to move on to plumbing, and I think our plumbing unit was about 5 or 6 weeks. So we've lost the entire plumbing unit. Whether they're just going to condense it into a shorter unit, or whether they're just going to do away with it altogether, I don't know. But this will also affect students in other ways, because if they're talking about extending the school year because they're going to need to make up on over a month's worth of school, if they're talking about that would mean that the first semester will go into January, possibly the beginning of February, and then that means the last semester of the second semester will get pushed back. This is going to limit job opportunities for all of us extremely, because a month after, most of the college and university students have gone out and gotten their jobs, so the job market is starting to tighten. It's starting to close at this point until the summer ends, and then people start going back to school. So during that time, the rest of the people who are affected by the strike are going to lose out on those job opportunities simply because our teachers decided to strike. While when the strike happened, the union and the faculty were saying that they've taken, the students' consideration to heart and, how this will affect the students to heart, it doesn't really seem like they have, because this is going to negatively impact the students greatly. Now, I already did an episode about this where I talked about what the demands were from the union, but right now I want to talk about this back-to-work legislation that's going to be tabled by Kathleen Wynne. I don't remember the last time I could say that Kathleen Wynne has done something that I'd agree with, but this would actually be one of them. Finally, I would actually say it's been a week or two late. She finally says that she's going to table the back-to-work legislation. This will mandate that all of those people on strike will have to go back to colleges. Classes can resume. If this goes through, classes could resume as early as Monday. Teachers could go back as early as Monday, and classes would resume on Tuesday because they need to give the teachers a day in order to prepare everything before all the students come back. I can just imagine how much of a shit show that's going to be, because everybody's going to be pissed off. Everybody's going to be behind. I wonder how much smaller my classes are going to be. And then we have so much work to make up on. I have 2 physics classes that are very difficult, and those are going to be hard to make up on, simply because of losing out on over a month's worth of education. And we couldn't really get in contact with the teachers unless they gave us their personal information in order to do so, which a few of my teachers did do in order we need to get in contact. While some teachers I did hear, some professors were sort of going off campus, and they were doing a no-no and, meeting up with students, helping them out, maybe giving some lessons to a few students who want to meet up somewhere. This is technically a no-no while you're on strike, but they were doing this in order to try and help out the students. My professors gave us their information in case we needed to contact them about anything, but they weren't offering anything such as that. It's also, for some of those classes, it would be very difficult to do that outside of the classroom. One of my classes is essentially, it would have been a blueprint classroom, but these days everything's done on computers. So now we use a system called software called AutoCAD. So doing that outside of the classroom would be very difficult for my professor, even though she gave us all the information in case we needed to contact her. But anyway, the problem that we're now facing with this back to work legislation is that the NDP, the provincial NDP, want to block this legislation from going through. Yeah, can you believe it? After 5 weeks of strike, the NDP don't want to send the teachers back to school. So as this article from the Global News goes on to tell us, it says Premier Kathleen Wynne announced Thursday she is tabling back-to-work legislation that would end the near 5-week strike by college faculty after negotiations between College Employer Council and the Ontario Public Service Employee Union failed. She asked the parties to resolve the issues, either through a negotiated agreement or by submitting to voluntary binding arbitration by 5 p.m. Thursday, which they were unable to do. Quote, "That's why we are immediately tabling legislation that would end the dispute and return Ontario college students to the classroom where they belong," end quote, Wynne said in a statement. Under the proposed legislation that we're introducing today, all outstanding issues would be referred to binding mediation arbitration, end quote. But the NDP blocked the attempt to table the bill after the normally scheduled time period to introduce legislation Thursday morning. NDP leader Andrea Horwath said in a statement that she would not support back-to-work legislation. She said she wanted students back in school Monday, but only through a deal. The Ontario PC said they would support the legislation, but leader Patrick Brown issued a statement condoning how long the strike has gone on. So as this article goes on, Andrea Horwath, the leader of the Ontario NDP party, she ends up going to say how this proves that Wynne was trying to table this legislation all along, and that this was a violation of workers' rights by trying to force them back to work. This is a very weak argument from her, because by now we've seen the effects that it's starting to have on the students, how they're actually starting to lose a lot of opportunity, a lot of money, because we've already paid for this semester, and now we're going to get a condensed version, regardless of how things go, even if they extend the year, we're still going to have a condensed version, because we're going to have to play catch up to everything. Then we're going to have to start on the new stuff. It's going to be a bit of a refresher for a lot of people. People are going to be slow at the start, without a doubt. And then we're losing out on job opportunities, as I've already stated earlier. While there are issues that still need to be addressed by the Employer Council, the problem is that we've been seeing more, at least in my opinion, I feel like we've been seeing more of a bend from the Employer Council rather than from the union. The union has stuck strong with what they wanted all along, which I get. But part of the thing about striking and negotiation is you have to give some stuff up. One strategy is you demand more than you actually want, in order that way you can give some stuff up and bring yourself down more to what you want. That's one strategy. But the union has been unwilling to budge on anything. But the council is willing to offer the union members an increase in pay. I think it was 7.75% over 4 years. They were willing to offer them better contracts in order to give them more job security. The only thing that the union said wasn't addressed in their latest offers was having to do with autonomy in the teachers in teaching their classes. They said that there would still be a lot of oversight by the colleges. Again, you got to give some things up. This may be one of those things you got to give up right now in order to gain, maybe in the future when there's another strike, possibly, or during another negotiation talk, this would be when it would be more of a heavy, critical thing. But just in my opinion, the way I figure you would go about things. And I mean, if this is a bigger issue for you, you want more autonomy, then you have to be willing to give something else up. If that happens to be job security, or that happens to be you don't get as much money, it has to be something. Something's got to give. But in the recent vote that happened on Thursday, the majority of those on strike actually voted to remain on strike. So to make the claim this is a violation of workers' rights, by now it's almost necessary for this to happen, or this could go on for however long. We've already now officially been the longest college strike in Ontario history. So by now, Kathleen Wynne has to make a move. And this is the right move to make. But Andrea Horwath, for some reason, wants this strike to go on longer. Not actually. She says she wants them back in class on Monday. But that's not going to happen, especially after this recent vote for no. There was absolutely no way we'd be back in class by Monday any other way. Unless legislation was brought in order to force the teachers back to work. The other thing I worry about this, though, is if this legislation does go through, what sort of quality of education are the teachers going to be willing to give to the students? Because I feel like they'd be disgruntled for going on strike for 5 weeks and really having nothing to show for it. And I'm not 100%, but if this legislation goes through, then I don't believe any of the demands that the teachers went on strike for would be addressed. Or at least the strike would be over, so the main pressure for it would be off. So now it would also give the colleges and the council more of a hand over dealing with the unions, I would say. And considering how Kathleen Wynne was going to say that she was going to push this legislation, she's been talking about it a couple times this week before finally on Thursday announced she was going to do it, I feel like the union has just shot itself in the foot. Because they could have had, at least, I would say, a good chunk of what they were going for, what they originally striked for, if they had voted in order to go back to work this Monday, but they didn't. But there will definitely still be searing embers there, so for the colleges to leave this would it'd be a pretty dumb decision, because that's just going to boil over into another strike eventually. So some of these will get addressed, but I feel like the union has just given up their hand. So for some time now, I don't know what it's been, maybe 3 years, 4 now, we've been dealing with the scum called ISIS. And we actually have them on their heels right now. From what I understand, they're losing all of their footholds everywhere. Whether this is just media propaganda or whether this is something legitimate, I'm not sure. It seems to me like we finally have ISIS on their back foot. However, an article came out recently from CBC in which they were talking about how nations are actively hunting down their own citizens who have gone down to fight for ISIS. Except Canada. We're the only one who are not hunting our own people. So as we have from this article, it says, even the interviewers seemed surprised at the answer Rory Stewart, the UK Minister of International Development, gave about how Britain should deal with citizens who chose to leave the country to join ISIS. Quote, I'm afraid we have to be serious about the fact that these people are a serious danger to us, and unfortunately the only way to dealing with them will be, in almost every case, to kill them. And Stewart told the BBC radio John Pinar last month. Stewart, a former diplomat, continued, quote, these are people that are executing people, who have held women and children hostage, who are torturing and murdering, trying, by violence, to impose their will. Our response has to be, when somebody does that, I'm afraid, to deal with that. End quote. Those sound like very harsh words, without a doubt, but when we really think about the horrors that we've heard come out of ISIS, and what ISIS wants, is there any real other way, really? Let's just start off with what ISIS has done. ISIS first went out on social media and broadcasted out to everybody in order to draw in troops to the Middle East. And they took citizens from all over the world. Canada, America, Britain, the rest of Europe, all the way over into the Asian continent. So they corrupted a lot of our youth into an ideology that is batshit crazy. And that was just when they were small time. Once they built up their forces, they went out across Syria and Iraq, killing, taking away children, women, raping them, forcing them to live under their brutal version of Sharia law. As brutal as Sharia law can be, I feel like what ISIS does can take it to an extreme extent. It's just, I remember a report a while ago where, oh God damn it. I am blanking right now on who's leading ISIS right now. Anyway, there was a report that came out that the head of ISIS had killed one of his right-hand mans because he was caught smoking. Now, I don't know if under Sharia law in most countries that would actually be something worth killing somebody over, but hey, maybe it is. Anyway, so they forced these people to live under a brutal form of Sharia law. They waged war essentially on all the non-believers, all the apostates, every single one of us. And they, in fact, they even released an article inside one of their magazines called Dabiq. The magazine was actually named after one of their cities, which was their stronghold for a while, which I believe they've lost by now. But the magazine was called Dabiq, and the article was called Why We Hate You and Why We Fight You, or it's the other way around, Why We Fight You and Why We Hate You. And they laid out pretty much their whole agenda, why they're doing it, what their end goal is. And they've said before, there's plenty of reasons for them to hate the West. Whether that happens to be for bombing them or corrupting them, whatever. But the main reason that they fought us is because we are not Islamic. The fact we are not Muslim. They full out said it, that was the main reason they're fighting us. While yes, bombing them was a damn good reason why they are fighting us. They said even if America and the rest of the West pulled out of the Middle East, left them be, they said they would then just deal with their immediate problems, and then once that was taken care of, they would return to attack the West. So this ideology proclaims that there's pretty much no peace unless we conform to their way, which we are not going to conform to their way. Absolutely not. And then, after ISIS has done this, they've spread their death, they spread their destruction, they spread their rape, they spread their torture, and everything else in between. After they've done this, which to me would seem like it's some sort of scene out of the movie Blood Diamonds with Leonardo DiCaprio, if anybody's seen that. Pretty damn brutal movie. Great movie, but fucking brutal. Seems like it'd be a scene out of that movie. After they do all this and wreak havoc across Syria and Iraq to the point where both nations are almost unrecognizable, to the point where the people living there pretty much have no sense of nationality to the country anymore. After all this, they send out a worldwide jihad against every one of us. And since that worldwide jihad, terrorist attacks have just continued on. They've gotten worse too, because now they're also encouraging people to commit acts of terrorism in cheaper and more effective ways. Because there's not a coincidence that suddenly we're seeing an influx of crowds being run down by cars. This was actually a form of attack that ISIS put out in one of their magazines, whether that one was Dabiq or one of the other ones. But that was put out by ISIS. And that was an idea by ISIS for the Muslims who believed in what ISIS was doing so they could carry out their own attacks inside of the countries which happened after the migrant crisis. ISIS themselves have said that during the migrant crisis, their own soldiers were smuggled into countries. And I completely believe that for the amount of ISIS fighters that are living in European countries now. And I mean, we look at a place like England, and people seem confused why there are more terrorist attacks. Because we've seen several inside of Britain alone this year, not to mention the ones that have taken over in France over the last few years. So are those words chilling? Yes, but it's an extreme that much of the West and people who are actually dealing with this situation have been pushed to. What else are they supposed to do? These aren't just foreign nationals These are her own citizens who have gone over and committed these atrocious acts, and who knows what they've done while they've been in there. From the sound of how the ISIS members treat their women, I would not be surprised that if some of these guys did terrible, terrible things. But as I stated, not Canada. We decided we're not going to do that. As we go back to this article, it says, but Canadians who join the militant groups have so far had little to fear from their own government, either at home or abroad. That's not a good start. Especially if you're talking about at home, because I don't want ISIS fighters living in Canada. Because if they went over to fight for them, which is an ideology that is completely anti-West and anti-Canadian, anti-American, and anti-everything we stand for, why do we want these people who have proven that they're willing to commit acts of violence living as our neighbors? I mean, I'll gladly have a displaced Syrian refugee family living next to me, but I don't want a goddamn ISIS fighter living next to me. In a situation like that, I actually would go out and get a gun. I would not trust anybody like that. Am I supposed to trust them with my family? No. Terrorists don't care who they hurt or who they kill. While even an apartment building that I live in would be a very low-profile place to hit, I don't care. I don't want some fucking terrorist living next to me. And there's plenty of people living in Canada, America, Britain, France, all over Europe that are actually dealing with these situations. They are living next to terrorists, people who fought against them. The British government has cooperated with the US on drone strikes that killed two of Britain's most notorious ISIS members, Mohammed Emwazi, aka Jihad John, and Junain Hussein. The Sunday Times reported that Britain's Special Air Service, SAS, has been given a kill list of British jihadis, including notorious ISIS recruiter and covert Sally Jones, and a dozen other of British university degrees in technical fields such as electronics. Brett McGurk, former U.S. President Barack Obama's special envoy to the fight against ISIS, who retained his post under Donald Trump, stated it explicitly on a recent visit to Syria. Quote, our mission is to make sure that any foreign fighters who is here who join ISIS from a foreign country and came into Syria, that they will die here in Syria, end quote. They're not just talking about it, said Christian Leprucht, an expert on terrorism and security at Royal Military College in Kingston, Ontario. Quote, Australia is another country that has taken the same approach, that they would prefer that those individuals who have been identified as foreign fighters not return home, end quote. France, too, is working to eradicate the jihadis overseas. A Wall Street Journal investigation published in May quoted French and Iraqi officials describing French special forces cooperating with Iraqi units to hunt down and kill French jihadis. But Canada has taken a different approach. Quote, Canada does not engage in death squads, end quote. Public Safety Minister Ralph Goodale said CBC's Power and Politics on Friday. Quote, with the battlefield activity winding down, there is a very real question about where the foreign fighters go and all of our allies. Whether they're in the Five Eyes or the G7, we've all agreed to collaborate very carefully, end quote. Goodale said anyone who possesses a terrorist risk, homegrown or from elsewhere, is viewed, quote, with the greatest of seriousness by Canada's intelligence, security, and police agencies. Defense Minister Harjit Sajjan said his department's job is ensuring foreign fighters don't become a threat. Quote, we will make sure that we put every type of resources into place so Canadians are well protected, he told a crowd in Halifax International Security Forum on Friday. At the end of 2015, the government said it was aware of about 180 individuals with a nexus to Canada who have traveled overseas to join such groups, and another 60 who have returned to Canada. According to a 2016 report, Public Safety Canada is aware of returning jihadis, quote, may have skills, experience, and relationships developed abroad that could be used to recruit or inspire individuals in Canada. They may also engage in terrorist financing, helping others to travel, or even planning attacks in Canada. The attacks directed by ISIS in Paris and Brussels provide examples. Most of the attackers were returnees linked to ISIS. So now is not the time to try and show the world that we're better than everybody else by saying we're not going to kill in this situation, because we actually do have a problem in there. We cannot allow these people to return home because they pose a real risk to us. But then at the same time, the Canadian government seems like they can't stay out there, so they have to return home. What's the solution? Oh, we're going to put a lot of resources to keep Canadians safe. So a lot of money, a lot of people, a lot of time. Now, I don't want to try and say, like, I just kill them and, we'll save all that. But the point is the risk that they can pose. These people who join ISIS aren't just going out there and then returning home like sort of like summer camp, They don't go out there for a few weeks, a few months, and it's like, okay, I gotta go home now. I go back to school in September. It doesn't work that way. They go out there for a reason. They return home for a reason. People don't just leave ISIS. They leave ISIS because they're released or they escape. Most of these people don't escape. They left ISIS and returned home with skills to commit terrorist attacks, to use weapons, make bombs, in order to carry out attacks against us. Most likely. That is what I am assuming. Because what other reason? They go over, they fight for the other side, and then they're also in a place where they're told is, and they believe, is some sort of Islamic paradise, and then they return to the sinful, terrible West that they're fighting against to live there? Really? That's it? They're just going to come home and live in Canada and enjoy the cold here because that's it? No. They come back for a reason, whether that's to recruit, gain information, or commit attacks. Because as we saw, the Paris attack, the Brussels attack were connected to ISIS fighters returning home. And we got to think about it. ISIS is our enemy. They have made themselves the enemy of the West. It isn't just like the entire Western countries, all of Europe and North America decided we were going to pick on ISIS. ISIS put themselves into the middle of everything and made sure the West was clear that they were their enemies, although many people in the West suddenly, especially on the left, have decided that they're going to blind themselves to that. But ISIS is our enemy. So now we have citizens who have left our country to go fight for the enemy. In any other situation, in any other war, would we accept people who defected to the other side back? No, because that is literally the charge of treason. You betray your country. And when you go fight for a force that is called for either the destruction or the complete subjugation of your home country, that is literally treason. In fact, that might be high treason. So why are these people just allowed to return and continue their lives? They shouldn't. If they return, they should be arrested immediately and placed on trial for treason. This is the way it's supposed to work. Take any war you want, any single other war you want. Would we accept this? Vietnam? If Americans went to go fight for the Viet Cong, would then the Americans just accept them to come back to their country? No. World War I, World War II? No. Any of the other wars in between and any of the other ones in history? No, you were a traitor. That's exactly who these people are when they go over to fight for ISIS. They are traitors and they need to be treated as such. And if that means putting them on trial when they return home, fine. But they're still the enemy. We may not be in a full-blown war, but we're clearly in a combat situation with them. Something has to be done. But instead, Canada wants to essentially reintegrate them, rehabilitate them. Is this Alcohol Anonymous? Terrorist Anonymous? Is that what we're doing now? We're just going to come back and have everybody sit in a group and just rehabilitate them? Because I'd love to see that. Because I can tell you one thing, that weak ass shit is not going to stand up to their, well, in their mind, their strong ideology. That is going to fall flat. That's not going to get anything done. Not in the type of mindset that these people are in. The other problem is in doing this is we are showing a great deal of weakness. Ralph Goodale, by saying this, has shown a great deal of weakness. We're not prepared to fight, not let alone our enemies, because Canada has really been pulling out of the fight against ISIS. Not only that, But now we're saying we're not even willing to fight our own citizens who go over and fight for the other side. How weak. The government getting pushed around by just a few citizens who go to fight for the other side? Yet, how strict can they be on the rest of us? They're going to let somebody go over and fight for ISIS and return home with what seems like next to no repercussions, aside there's going to be extra security placed on them or some shit like that, so extra taxpayers' money and resources being put into them to make sure they don't do anything. But then for the rest of us, apparently when I'm at a job or something, I can't misgender somebody without getting into trouble. Are you fucking kidding me? What ISIS does is literally crimes against humanity, for fuck's sakes. There are crimes against humanity. Trudeau's Liberals are taking a very weak stance on very many issues. They probably believe they're taking the passive stance, but it's just making them appear weak. In comparison to somebody like Stephen Harper's Conservatives and some of the stuff that he did, it really appears that the Liberals are weak. Because I remember a story about when the Ukraine crisis happened. Maybe it was the UN. I think it was possibly the UN. Stephen Harper saw Vladimir Putin, elbowed his way through everybody right up to Putin, and got in his face and said, "I have one thing to say to you: get the fuck out of Ukraine." Well, not in that way. Get out of Ukraine. And he turned around and he walked away. That shows a strong leader, in my opinion. And I'm not even a Stephen Harper fan, but he definitely was a strong leader in those regards, and he was a guy who stuck by what he was going to do. So you got to respect him in some regards for that. Trudeau is just... everything he does, I feel, is for brownie points. And it's actually leading us down a dangerous path. These Liberals, again, it seems like this is a brownie points move, trying to make us look, oh, so goody two-shoes in the eyes of the world. But no, real people are going to pay for this. Real Canadians are going to pay for this. I get the feeling the next time we hear about a terrorist attack in Canada, it's going to come from one of these ISIS fighters who had gone over and returned. So I'm having camera trouble, so I'm going to have to switch over to the avatar for the rest of the podcast. So it appears that the anti-science movement is alive and is strong as ever. For those who've been watching me for a while, they'll know that I'm a big believer in science, and I don't like it when people will willingly forego science. And the reason I bring this up is because now the new narrative that's getting pushed, which of course there's already a lot of pushback yet, but believe me, it is going to catch on. It is going to catch on. Transracialism. The ability that you can transition from race to race, especially you feel a certain race from birth, and then, yeah, you're actually that race. So a white person who feels that they are in fact a black man, let's say. Or probably the most recent one is the transracial man born white who feels like he is Filipino. This is the new narrative that's going around. Essentially, this is going to be the new movement from the LGBT community that we're going to see, which is transracialism. Do you remember when even now, even this past Halloween, we were being lectured, especially us white people, about cultural appropriation? I remember, I don't know, maybe it's like a year ago now, I got into, not an argument, but a conversation about that with my best friend's sister. Her family, all of them were over at my parents' place for dinner, because, our families are connected since me and my buddy, we've known each other since we were like 5 or 6, so since forever our family's been connected. And yeah, I kind of got in a debate about that, because she was feeling that, it's stealing from other cultures and stuff. And I kind of, pointed out the ridiculous of it to her, what I said, well, yeah, but would you ever, essentially my go-to is always that the stereotype for a person, the stereotype for a white man is a suit. The business suit, the businessman, the corporate lawyer, or whatever. That's always the stereotype. So I was saying, well, if we're thinking about it and we're thinking about it in reverse, does anybody of a different race who wears a suit, are they culturally appropriating from white people? What about a polo shirt, which is typically seen as, the old man white golfer look? Are all these mean that other races are being culturally appropriated from? It's just the ridiculous of it. Now, in terms of transgenders, I've said before that I believe there's a spectrum. There's some guys that have more testosterone, so they're more guyish, and there's some guys that are a lot more feminine. So there's a spectrum to men and women, but there's a binary spectrum. I think that, so I could see it. I actually do believe that it's possible for people to feel like a woman trapped in a man's body or vice versa. I could see it, but it's a gender dysphoria. Like, it's not just a natural thing. This is actually a mental illness. It's gender dysphoria. So we have to be honest on that. But a lot of people don't like it when you talk about it being gender dysphoria. They want you to believe that, no, it's completely natural. They are women or they are men, and you have to identify as that. We have to be honest in what it is. And people want you to treat them as if it is completely natural, as if, no, absolutely, there's nothing weird about that. I stated I'm pretty sure it was my last podcast, the one about Red Pill Black and Blair White, that in a situation where I meet a transgender person, they want to be called she or called he, fine, no problem. Just no point in starting shit over that, just meeting somebody. Actually, I got that on my buddy's wedding. I went to a wedding which was knew a few people from my work, but then and then I started meeting some new people. I met one dude and he called over his girlfriend. I was like, okay, she comes over with her blonde hair and everything. It turned out to be a transgender woman, so I didn't realize till she got close. But I called her she for the rest of the wedding. I'm not going to start shit over that, so I don't care that much. But if we're being honest about it, it's gender dysphoria. It is a mental illness in that regard. But now they want you to say the same thing about your race. Now they want you to be able to cross over. But then, how much more offensive is this than compared to a cultural appropriation thing? I mean, in cultural appropriation, you're just taking their clothes or something similar, their food, something along the lines, appropriating some part of their culture. In this one, you're appropriating all of their culture. You were born as something else, as a white person, a black person, an Asian person, whatever, and now you're saying that you are part of another race, another culture, and because of that, you pretty much say you take on their same responsibilities, their same feelings, their same discriminations, injustices, if you want. So say you're a white person who says that you really feel like you're a black person at heart. Well, then what? Does that mean that you are part of the oppressed, that you are not part of the privileged, cisgender, white male society? This whole thing is falling apart. This whole progressive PC narrative is just, it falls apart once you get into it a little bit. Once it goes just a little too far, things just completely shatter. Now, it's not like in modern day right now people are taken super seriously like transgenderism or homosexuality, where they say like, it's serious, we need to protect them, sort of thing. People are definitely at the moment skeptical of being transracialism, and I'm sure especially because this comes from what would be considered the progressive left, and more possibly even almost part of the LGBT community. The left is a little skeptical about calling out racism right away. The irony. But when somebody makes a move like that, your first thought is to call it racism, especially if you're on the progressive left, when racism and sexism is everything. But this, I would even say, is this is even a big change compared to 2 years ago. If you remember Rachel Dolezal, who actually came back up in the news recently, but if everyone remembers Rachel Dolezal, who was the former head of the NAACP, it came out that she was in fact a white woman with white parents, but had been identifying as a black woman because she had tan skin, though it made her appear a little bit dark. She had curly black hair, which would look like some black women's hair. But then it came out that she was in fact Caucasian. So there was a huge shitstorm as people, completely condemned her. She came out as transracial and saying it was something that society just didn't understand yet. That's essentially what she said in an interview. After a week or two of this controversy going on, she eventually came out and gave an interview in which she said that it was transracialism and just that society had not caught up yet. But during that time, Rachel Dolezal was really called out for, for pretending to be a black woman. Because a lot of people are saying, well, you haven't lived our life. You don't know what we've been through. Like, our culture has history to it, especially in America with a lot of, the slavery to it. When people want to talk about the history, to relate to that history when you're a white person is, hell, what happens if we looked way back in Rachel Dolezal's past and it turned out that one of her ancestors was a slave owner, which, for a lot of people who have origins going back that far in America, it's a very real possibility. Don't know how far our origins go back, though. But this is way worse than trying to claim cultural appropriation. But then we can just see the shift. In 2 years, from 2015 to 2017, we went from complete condemnation of Rachel Dolezal for what she did to now a skepticism of what this white transracial man who's trying to be Filipino is doing. Just from the article, it was completely different. If you looked at the news sources, looked at the articles from back in 2015, they were much more condemning of what she was doing. But in this one, they're actually treating this white man with skepticism. Like, okay, maybe you're onto something. It's like, no, he's not. He's somebody who's fucking crazy, and he's somebody who's doing something stupid. Many people could actually be offended by this, as seeing as you appropriating their entire fucking race, their history, their culture, their food, and everything along with it. To me, this shows an unhealthy shift for the left, for things that they're really starting to push these days, and even things that they're not pushing, but ideas that they're toying with are not good ideas. These are like the articles that came out from Salon, and I think The Guardian, but it may have been another. Don't quote me on being The Guardian, because it may not actually be them. I know Salon for a fact put out an article a few years ago, but it was pretty much toying with the idea that pedophilia is a disorder. Like, it's a medical, sexual, mental disorder, rather than just dealing with it as a crime. So essentially, instead of dealing with people the way we do now, it's saying, like, that's disgusting. They want you to treat it as more people saying they need help. Which is just, no, not when kids are on the line. That's not the way to treat things, but these are dangerous ideas to toy with. But the left seems much more willing to do this, while liberals and people on the left generally are more creative and more inventive, and that's why a lot of something like Hollywood or the entertainment industry is very much more left-wing. These are where the creative minds come from. That being said, that does mean, and especially because left-wingers and liberals are much more open to change, that also means that it can be open to dangerous change, such as transracialism. In a few years, if this narrative continues, we're going to see how this is going to have huge blowback. It's actually going to have very negative effects for the people who identify as this, because they're not going to find solace on any side. You're not going to be able to be a white person who identifies as a black person and get actual support from the black community. Probably not, because they're going to view you as a white person, especially if it's much more of these progressive, or I should say regressive, black members of the black community, those ones who are part of the progressive movement. Those are the ones that are just going to see you as, regardless, as a white male or a white woman, or just part of the white supremacist dominated society. And then while I feel like with the white people, if we had such as a black man who identified with white people, you find more solace there. But if you're going in between certain races, I find you're probably not going to find that, such as, say, you're a Latino man transition, a black man, or other way around. Well, now you've left one group and you're not getting accepted by the other one, most likely because you haven't had their shared culture, their shared history, their shared repression. And are you really going to find solace on the other side when you're kind of trying to leave the race? For instance, if you're a black man trying to become a Latino man, are you then Like, do you feel like you're going to get support from the black community for trying to leave them? So I just feel like this is going to blow up on all sides, that this is really just a bad narrative that's going to end badly for the people who identify as transracial, but also for everybody else, because we're just destroying any truth narratives that we have left. It just reminds me of this whole narrative that nothing is true, everything is subjective, which is a dangerous narrative. Nothing true and everything subjective. Everything is because of societal factors. That's why black people are black, white people are white. That's why men are men, women are women. Men are men because they played with action figures when they were kids. Women are women because they played with dolls and, little kitchen sets or anything like that when they were little girls. Men are men because they were encouraged to play sports. Women are women because they were encouraged to be more docile. These sort of narratives. But never before in a day has they actually encouraged women to be more aggressive in society than today. Which is a little ironic because they still say that, we're trying to teach women to be docile. It's like, I don't know, man. We're actually got some pretty aggressive females in sports and shit now. So I don't really know how this is actually still a true narrative or anything like that. But that's not the reason men are men and women are women. However, I do believe that this narrative getting pushed about, they're just trying to teach all women to be docile and this, that, and the other, is leading to the rise of such as aggressive females, because now they want to rise above it, even though they don't actually have this disadvantage put towards them. Some do, for sure. I'm sure there are women out there that are told that they need to be more docile, but it's not like it used to be. It's not like we're having arranged marriages where they don't meet their husband till their wedding day, where they're being told by their fathers and their husbands what to do. So this whole narrative is just doesn't really exist these days. But speaking about the whole truth situation, this actually brings us back to Rachel Dolezal, because as I said a little while ago, she was back in the news recently. An article came out from the USA Today with the headline, Rachel Dolezal, I was too black for my husband. So Rachel Dolezal has once again returned after her humiliating outing publicly back in 2015, only to double down on being a black woman and saying that her first husband was too black of a woman for her. You're a fucking white woman. No, you weren't too black for your husband. Maybe actually, if anything, maybe he got tired of you saying that you were a black woman when you're not. So this article says, Rachel Dolezal paints a dark picture of her childhood in her new memoir in full color, Finding My Place in a Black and White World. That title just reeks of pretentiousness. Like, even in the title, you can tell that she still believes that she's a black woman, despite the fact society has come out against her. And told her that she is in fact a white woman. In fact, even her parents came out and said that. Her parents even came out during the 2015 crisis and were like, she's white, we're white, she's white. But anyway, it says, in her book, she says her brother molested her as a child, her family forced her to eat her own vomit, and she wore clothing made of dog fur. Well, brother molesting her could be very true. I mean, we hear a lot of stories of that happening. Forced to eat her own vomit and made her wear clothes made out of dog fur. I'll tell you why I don't believe that, because her life got looked into pretty damn publicly back in 2015, and this did not come up. There was nothing anyone was talking about her being abused, molested as a kid. While, granted, these are sometimes things you need to wait for them to come out with, but when you look into history of somebody, you can usually find evidence and signs of certain things. Especially just even talking to other people. Some people say, like, well, I don't know, I think they were abused or something like that. It'll put you down a path. But none of this comes up, and now suddenly, as a child, you're forced to eat vomit and wear clothes made of dog fur. That's pretty extreme. She talks about her desire to be black at a young age. Quote, I would pretend to be a dark-skinned princess in the Sahara Desert or one of the Bantu women living in the Congo. Imagining I was a different person living in a different place was one of the few ways that I could escape the oppressive environment I was raised in. End quote. Again, I really don't know much about what her childhood was like. Maybe it was oppressive, maybe it was not. Maybe she went through this shit. Maybe she did not. But the point is because of this, she even just said it right here, she lives in a fantasy world because of that. Because when she was a child, she used to pretend to be there. Yeah, you know what? So did I. I too, as a child, used to pretend about certain things. I too pretended that, say, oh, here's a good one. I've always said that Star Trek The Next Generation was one of my favorite shows when I was growing up. I also was a big fan of Star Wars. I too pretended that I was in the Star Wars universe or the Star Trek universe. You know, you're running around with your phasers or laser guns, your lightsabers. I mean, let's take Star Wars universe. Does that make me, because I strongly believed and imagined when I was a kid that I was a Jedi, that I am now a fucking Jedi? It doesn't work that way. I'm not a goddamn Jedi, and if I was well, I wouldn't be here because I'd be fucking rich right now. Now, my childhood, I wasn't running from any oppressive parenting or bullying brothers or anything like that. Mine was just more because when I was younger, I was more on the social outcast group, so I didn't have a lot of friends. My buddy, who I mentioned earlier, was one of them. We also had a friend of ours who was a Greek diplomat. His father was a Greek diplomat, so he was with us till grade 6. Eventually he went away, but this is what we did with our time. We imagined shit when we were like, I don't know, early elementary school, grades 1 through like 3 or something like that. That's what we did. Till, you know, we got older and started making more friends and stuff. And yeah, we still went off and did our imagination thing while we were kids, but this didn't mean that what we were doing was real. But what's unhealthy, at least from what I can tell, is, well, even me and my buddies at a young age were aware we're doing this. We were aware that none of it was real, even if we were lost in the world at the time. We were aware that, say, when the recess bell rung, we were back to class. We didn't continue believing on we were fucking Jedis. But she, for some reason, has continued on believing she was a black woman because of these fantasies she had as a kid. She would rub mud on her hands, arms, feet, legs, she writes. So she would go blackface. I'll just leave it right there. As she grew older, she didn't correct those who thought she was black. In fact, she embraced it. She tanned and braided her hair. Her first marriage to an African-American man was rough because, Dolezal writes, she was too black for him. To her African-American husband, she was too black for him. Wow. Wow. What arrogance. What self-entitlement to say that you were too black than your black husband. Yeah, and I can beat Yoda with one arm tied behind my back. See, something like this is why I'm not inclined to believe also those earlier narratives that she's saying that she was living in an oppressive childhood, that she was forced to eat vomit and wear fur made out of from dogs. When she's saying things like she believes she's black because she just always wanted to be and imagine herself, then she lived this lie. She literally lived it by not correcting people, and even, like she said, embraced it. And then she finished off by saying, yeah, she's too black. Why should we believe anything else she's going to tell us? Especially because she went through her whole life lying she was a black person. Because she said here she didn't correct people, she embraced it. Which means that through the rest of her life, up until the time she got outed, she was identifying as a black woman. That is a lifetime of a lie. And now you write a book and I'm expected to believe that what you're telling me is the truth? I'm expected to believe that your childhood is so oppressive? What if her child was so oppressive because her parents kept telling her, sweetie, you're a white woman, you're not black. Please stop saying that because you're going to make us look like we're fucking racists. Maybe that's what she's complaining about, being so oppressive. But anyway, there's just no reason for any of us to trust Rachel Dolezal for what she says. Anyway, as we continue through this USA Today article, it says, last year, Dolezal legally changed her name to Nkechi Amare Diallo, a West African way of saying gift from the gods to help with job searches, but continued to use Dolezal in her public persona, AP reports. I take it she means that she was doing this so people don't recognize her name and don't associate her as the former leader of NAACP and, the whole controversy. But to say that you changed your name from Rachel Dolezal to a West African name, Nkechi Amare Diallo, that really is not going to help with job interviews and resumes and everything like that, because again, I saw this a while ago on the Young Turks, so, take it with a grain of salt. I remember this from years ago. But apparently, according to them, they said that that having what sounds like an immigrant name, or essentially, if you have more of a white-sounding name, you're more likely to get a callback on a resume. I think this might be true, but partly not even it's a racist thing. It's just I think a lot of people will feel that if it's somebody with a white name, more specifically probably a citizen, compared to, say, somebody with what sounds like an immigrant name, it's going to be easier for the citizen to integrate and be able to do the job than it would be for the immigrant. That's my assumption. But really, in the end, you're not helping yourself by changing your name to that, and you're even doubling down by making it a West African name. And of all things, you choose the gift from the gods, because I get the feeling that clearly has reference to tribal West African religion and deities. Would that be considered a triple down by naming herself that, where she's pretty much saying that she is the gift of the African gods? But anyway, Dolezal said in a release she wrote in the book to, quote, advance the conversation about race and to set the record straight about her life. Quote, I wish Americans understood that race is a social construct, even if we don't want it to be, she said in the release. The system of racial classification is fiction, and we need to thoroughly evaluate whether perpetuating it rigidly or allowing fluidity across the spectrum best supports human rights and social justice, end quote. Whoa. She said that is a social construct. This is exactly the narrative that's getting pushed around about everything, including the gender issue, is that it is a social construct. As I stated earlier, it's because men played with action figures, women played with Barbies. Social construct. And that the system of race classification is fiction. No, it's not. The whole race thing, I mean, if we look at it, when we use stuff as such as, Caucasian and African American, really all we're using politically correct terms to say white and black, because that's our skin type. If I hold up the color white and compare it to my skin, I will be a white person. If I have a black person next to me, I hold up the color black, their skin will most likely more be in contrast with the color black. That's why. This is not a fiction. This is reality. This is literally something we can see. But then this narrative comes out then, essentially that nothing is true, everything is subjective. And this is a dangerous narrative that is continuously getting pushed these days. It has led rise to the gender issue. It has led rise to the whole children and transgenderism, where we have 6-year-olds that are saying they're the wrong gender now. This is the sort of narrative that has led to that. In fact, it has perpetuated it. And this is another narrative that is just going to perpetuate this crazy narrative of transracialism. No matter what day of the week, we just can't seem to get away from the crazy, can we? There's always going to be somebody out there, some new person or some old face that is going to step forward to give us some new form of, well, we can't look on it as a form of entertainment because it just seems ridiculous. When we actually take these sort of narratives seriously, it leads us down a dangerous path, which is what we're seeing. This is part of the problem that we're having in society these days, that everything is subjective when we need an objective truth. And science, for the most part, can lead us to an objective truth in terms of the physical world. I mean, Christ, you want to know about gender? Science can tell you that. You want to know about race? Science can tell you that. You want to know about what chemical compound makes up the earth or whatever else? Science can tell you that. But we're turning our back on science right now. Now we're saying it's not your chromosomes that decide your gender. Now we're saying it's not your pigment that decides your race or your skin color. This is just getting out of hand. That's all I have for you on the podcast today. Very soon, actually, I am going to have a bit of an update on my look. I actually ordered some custom-made clothes to wear on the podcast, and also I got myself a little bit of a better setup that's going to come in within the next week or so, and I get myself set up. As long as my camera doesn't screw up, which it did at the end of this episode of the podcast, I'll be able to unveil it. If not, then I don't know what I'm going to do. I'm going to have to figure out something with my camera, whether order a new one, get it repaired or something. I don't know, it just started flashing and then shut off partway through. I hope it doesn't make it through to the actual video of the podcast, but we'll see. But anyway, yeah, I've got a new setup coming up that's going to look kind of flashy, I think. I think you all are going to enjoy it. Thank you for joining me on the podcast today. I'm Adrian Lloyd. This is just my stupid opinion. I'll see you soon.